Alright guys, welcome to the latest episode of the Starski and Hutch Ford Gran Torino. We're going to take a look at the completed chassis in this episode. Okay, here we go with the completed chassis with suspension and exhaust installed. Oh, I heard a lot of questions being asked about whether the floor pan was red or black. For this particular car, building the Starsky and Hutch model, I have found information stating that the floor pan was black, but the frame, the floor pan was red, but the frame was black. So I went with that as for the paint scheme of the underside of this car. As you can see here, I've also installed the exhaust, which I've painted to give a heat discolored look to the pipes using a base coat of Tamiya titanium silver with a dusting of Tamiya titanium gold and Tamiya bronze to give it that heated burned look. Same technique I used on the transmission, all applied with an airbrush. Here you can see the rear suspension with the springs I fabricated, installed, the shock absorbers, and just as a note, there is a right and a left shock absorber. They look the same, but they don't fit the same. If you look at the top part of the shock, the instructions show the end of the shock here, which extends forward on this one side than it does on the other. If you look at the instructions, it looks as if that end should be inboard toward the rear axle. I found that if you install it that way, the shocks won't sit exactly straight. So I installed them with that end facing outboard, away from the axle, and it sat perfectly straight. It's just one of the things I noted in this kit. With the instructions, it's not 100% accurate. Here in the front, you can see also that I've added coil springs to the front suspension. This required clamping down the front suspension as the coil springs actually pushed the suspension away from the frame. So I used my Husky clamps that I got at Home Depot to hold it on the upper and lower control arms in position as the glue dried. That allowed the suspension to stay in its proper position and actually compress the springs as if they were under load. This front suspension is a single piece assembly, but it looks pretty good. Basically, it just inserts into the frame, and that's all there is to it as far as installing that. The rear suspension is a 4-piece assembly, including the shocks, the upper and lower halves of the differential with the control arms already attached, and the 2 shock absorbers which go into the body and attach to the back of the rear differential. Then you have a separate drive shaft, which when you're installing it, the instructions show you installing the drive shaft and the rear differential at the same time. If you do that, the drive shaft will not fit. I found it easier to install the drive shaft into the rear differential and then angle the drive shaft downward into the transmission, lowering the differential at the same time. And then you'll get it right in there, which even leaves it free to rotate. Didn't put all the weathering painting there. As this car is Starsky and Hutch's car, as it tears through the streets, it's not going to be clean and shiny. So that's what I'm building. All right. Well, that's pretty much it. Now here's fuel tank, which I use the same technique on of painting and then dusting with the other two colors that I described earlier. And that's the whole chassis. I really like the way this came out. Love the results. As you can see, it's all based on a black plastic part. The chassis was all black, and now it's not. Required quite a bit of masking just to get the frame to stand out from the floor pan. I really enjoyed this part of the build, and I'm looking forward to the rest. Alright guys, well that's it for now. Give you one last quick look of the engine installed into the chassis. This kit is not the most parts intensive kit. There's not really a lot of parts to it, but it builds up really nice. Everything fits really nicely, and so far it's been a very, very fun build. And can't wait to continue. All right, see you on the next one.